Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Tales of Home, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. By the time the river opened to marsh and the radio fell to a thread of static, the afternoon had that low country weight. I came up from Jacksonville with invoices belted in the passenger seat and coffee gone cold, driving slow enough to listen to the live oaks leaning toward the road, as if they had something to tell me. Willow Lane curled quiet under Spanish moss. I'd painted those porch rails the spring Ava finished school. Rounding the last bend, I lifted my foot as if my body knew bad news before my eyes did. My things were on the curb. Boxes with their mouths slumped open. A lampshade caved like a lung. Books dark with grit. The quilts I pieced the winter after Thomas died lay folded on a plastic bin. I'd never seen a bright thread from the star pattern lifting and waving in the heat. Neighbors practiced their polite pretending. Mr. Calhoun watered buttercups that didn't need it. Miss Hattie held her mail and left the lid of her box open like a waiting mouth. Sloane stood in my doorway. Pale linen kimono cinched at the waist, mine, once tied neat as a bow on a package addressed to herself. One hand on the knob, the other on her hip, the posture she uses when she needs everyone to understand. She understands everything. Ava stood behind her, not touching, not far. My girl's mouth had that straight, unarguable line she learned in studio critiques. She didn't meet my eyes. She looked over my shoulder at the maple leaning toward the drive like it was trying to listen through the screen. The not looking wasn't new. It was only official now. Afternoon, I said to the porch. If Sloane expected a scene, she wouldn't find one in me. I set my keys on the trunk and took the top box. Books and a bowl shifted, the bottom flexed. The bowl was a hand-thrown church sale piece with a thin crack like a river in ink. I set my palm over it the way you steady a heart that startles. You could have called, Sloane said. Her voice was soft and honest about its claws. I stepped carefully. Gravel ticked under my flats. Sweat gathered where the cardboard bit my ribs. Mom, Ava said, and left the rest of the sentence in the mouth of the afternoon. She rubbed the inside of her wrist with her thumb, an old habit from years when she thought I didn't notice. I set the box in the trunk and felt the car take the weight like a steadying animal. I stood a moment with my hands on the lip of the trunk, watching dust drift in the sun. The hose shut off. The spigot made its clean thunk. Miss Hattie's dog chose not to bark. Sloane's perfume, something that claimed citrus and smelled like change, found me in a brief, bright ribbon. "What are you doing?" Sloane asked. Irritated that I refused her script, I let the question hang. When you don't hand people a reply, they are left with their own echoes for company. Back at the curb, I lifted another box. Recipe cards, rubber band melted to amber sat on a coil of extension cord, and a jar of buttons from Thomas's mother. The cards smelled faintly of nutmeg. I set the box beside the books. The trunk began to look like a room a small, careful person could live in. Ava tried again. "Mom." Not a plea so much as a test. I didn't move toward her. The porch boards were hot under Sloane's bare feet, and she shifted. That shift told me what I needed, who picked which words, and how long they'd rehearsed them. I closed the trunk. The sound traveled the street and came back wearing its own echo. I touched my palms to the painted metal to cool them. A breeze ran off the marsh, lifting the edges of the paper slumped from one of the boxes. I tucked the paper under the lid. Ordinary repair. Sloane tugged her belt, made sure the knot sat pretty. "We've got it from here," she said in the tone people use when they mean you're finished. I looked past her into the dim hall where the thrift store mirror Ava and I found last fall still hung a little left of square. It caught the edge of me, hair pulled back, throat shiny with heat, a woman with her hands set for work. I picked up the last small thing left on the boards, a wooden salt cellar with a sliding lid. The grain glowed where the sun reached it. You learn a kind of attention, tending what other people use, the hinge points of a life, where things open, where they stay shut, what gets carried, what is laid down. I slid the cellar into my bag. I did not look at Sloane. I did not look at Ava. I looked at the car that knew my hands and the road that never asked me to explain myself. Keys back in my palm, door open, seatbelt across my shoulder. The radio found a voice that wasn't all static. A brown pelican crossed the marsh and its shadow moved along the shingles, then over the street and kept moving. The house was behind me. The road ran forward, ordinary and exact. I stayed with the ordinary road. Victory Drive, then Habersham, where the lanes narrow and the porches sit close enough for neighbors to pass sugar without stepping down. The radio found a station out of Brunswick playing a song I knew by heart and couldn't sing. Sun made a plate of the windshield. I rolled the window for air and let the salt ride in. A pair of boys on bikes counted my car out loud as I passed and laughed when they got it wrong. At the four-way by the corner market, the light held long. I set my wrist on the wheel and looked at the nicked skin near my thumb where a box had bit me. It was not bleeding, only declared. The market door opened and a woman came out with a bag of ice against her chest, steam of cold lifting from the torn opening. Somewhere a hammer hit something stubborn 3 times and then gave up. When the light slipped green, I didn't turn for Willow Lane. I followed the oak shade toward downtown past the square with the statue that still points to no one anyone knows, past row houses with windows squinting against the afternoon. In the glove box, a wad of receipts tamed by a hair tie, the bank pen with its brass clip, last year's inspection folded into an airplane I'd never flown. I laid the receipts in the passenger seat and sifted auto parts from Tripp's garage, where I did books on Tuesday's cat food, and a birthday candle, 3 grocery slips in the same week, from when Ava and Sloan swore they were cooking more at home, the kind of more that requires lavender honey and lamb shoulder. My name printed clear at the top, my card. My signature looped where the pad had been rough. Numbers are a language you can trust even when people decide not to be trusted. The student loan statement had come that morning before I left Jacksonville, white envelope with the window like a single blank eye. I didn't open it, but I knew the shape of its asking. The first time we sat with a loan officer, the man clicked his pen twice and slid us a paper with the APR ringed in yellow. Co-signer, he said, polite as church. Ava's hand found the hem of her sleeve and rucked it silly under the table. I put my name where hers still needed help. We drove home the long way on US 17, and she talked about light, how it sits in a room and makes up its mind how a staircase wants to be seen from below and from above, how a roofline should look like a sentence that knows where it's going. I said yes to interest the way you say yes to a child's fever, not because you want it, but because there it is. The nights I cleaned offices, the world smelled like lemon and wet paper. I learned the angle of my own elbow, how to make a window admit it was glass. The first week my palms throbbed where the mop handle had no patience for softness. By December, the skin there had thickened into knowledge. The security guard, a man old enough to be my father, brought me peppermint tea and told me which elevator behaved and which played tricks. In the garage's back office, invoices came smudged with grease, and Monroe, who's run trips since his brother's back quit, liked to tell me which carburetor had no business living this long. I typed part numbers and laughed where laughing did no harm. The work stacked without asking for thanks. It was clean even when it was dirty. Sloan's mother called during a tropical storm 3 years back to say their landlord had decided to sell and given them 30 days to invent a new plan. Sloan had a plan by supper, and the plan's spine ran straight through me. Just until the market calmed, she said a phrase that fits any month if you want it to. I wrote 2 rent checks to a man who signed his name in pieces and smelled like cigars even over the phone. "You'll get your kindness back," Sloan said in the voice that had convinced restaurant hosts and deans, and once a tow truck driver who called me ma'am and towed for free. I waited for kindness, kept making dinner, kept folding laundry until the towels looked stood to attention. When a thing didn't come, I did not count it a debt. I only counted. The bungalow was supposed to be half and half. Ava came home from Raleigh with a certificate and a laugh that had found a backbone. "We can make it work," she said, and Sloan nodded like a metronome. We sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a Sharpie and drew lines where lines felt brave. The mortgage was light enough to carry if it was shared, and heavy enough to bend a shoulder if it wasn't. I watched the autopay show up and leave my checking as regular as the tide. When the water heater went mean, I paid the man who coaxed it sweet. When the porch rail splintered under a neighbor's elbow, I bought the paint. We painted together one Saturday and took a picture with our wrists flecked white. If you looked quick, you couldn't tell which arm was mine. There were other lists I kept and folded away, a summer trip I wanted that traced the coast to the Outer Banks and back. The second-hand Pentax at the pawn shop on Whitaker with a strap soft from someone else's neck. A sign for a bookkeeping office I sketched once, simple black letters on a white door. Whitfield Ledger and Light, because numbers are brighter when you fix them. I didn't put those lists by the receipts. I kept them where a woman keeps something that is hers, even when she says yes to everything else. Traffic thinned near the courthouse. The sidewalks widened and made room for people who preferred not to brush shoulders. I turned on Drayton for the bank, the one with the brass that remembers handprints and the marble that holds the days cool in its pockets. Seaboard Trust and Savings is carved above the door as if the name is certain. In the reflection I saw what anyone would, a car that could use a wash, a woman with hot cheeks and no time for being brave about it. Inside smelled like ink and old coins. A fan on a tall stand rolled the air slow enough not to pretend. The guard by the entrance held his hands at exactly noon on his belt and nodded like we had agreed on something. The foyer mosaic has a ship in it, a schooner lifted by triangles of wind-blue tiles, chipped where too many heels had practiced impatience. I put the bank pen in my bag where it belonged and took a numbered card from the little silver stand. The card said 32. The window lit, said 27. Waiting is easier when you have something to do with your eyes. I gave them the ledger of the room, the couple at the far window sorting a cashier's check like it was a map. The man in a suit that fit everywhere but the shoulders, the girl in a teller's blazer with a smear of mascara like a bruise she'd missed. The clock behind the desk clicked once and then remembered it was supposed to be quiet. When 28 flicked to 29, I took out my wallet and ran a thumb over the soft edge where the leather had made its own decision to curve. Ava was born in the middle of a July that boiled water without a pot. I remember the hospital bed's squeak and the nurse's shoes and the way the blinds held back the light like a friend arguing on your behalf. I remember Thomas crying once like a boy and once like a man, and how I knew the difference. After he died, I learned the weight of mail that arrives with no handwriting. You stack it. You answer it. You don't let it decide what your life is, even as you hand it pieces of your life to keep. The day I co-signed the first loan, Ava hugged me in the parking lot and said she'd pay it down fast. I've got ideas, she said. I did not ask for the ideas. I asked her if she'd eaten, and she said she'd had coffee, which is an answer if you're 22 and still able to dream without getting tired. The number board showed 31, and people rearranged themselves like it mattered. The teller with the mascara smear called someone sweetheart, and then remembered to call him sir. I kept my left hand still on my knee and let my right get the stubborn tremor out where no one could see. The tremor is not fear. It is a small animal that lives in the wrist and barks when there has been too much carrying. When I got to the window, the teller had a nameplate that said Renee in blue letters. Afternoon, she said, and her smile had a line through the middle like a river in late summer. I slid my driver's license under the glass and said my name. I didn't put anything extra on the end of it. What can we do for you today, Ms. Whitfield? I could have used any sentence. I used the one that fit. Safe deposit access and a signature on file, I said. Her eyes did a quick clean of my face the way a person checks weather. Of course, she said, and her voice dropped into a tone that people keep for things they pretend are ordinary. She pressed a button. A door in the back released itself, and an attendant appeared, young and careful, with a ring of keys that made a neat music at her hip. Right this way, the attendant said. The carpet swallowed our footsteps. We passed the offices where glass held people inside their decisions, and a printer banged its drawer shut with more impatience than machines are supposed to feel. In the corridor to the vault, the air forgot the day and took up the building's temperature. My skin cooled. My head did too. The attendant handed me a metal clipboard on a chain and a pen that didn't want to run until you told it to. The ledger catwalked under my palm, names like a census of quiet lives dates, written with the same numbers standing at attention in their blue lines. I put my hand where it always goes, when it's time signed, once then again, where the second signature box waited because someone had decided 2 is certain where 1 is not. The vault door is the color of decisions that hold. You can smell the old nickel and the dust that refuses to be scolded. The attendant kept her keys speaking politely to each other while she looked for the one I needed. Take your time, she said. It wasn't a kindness, but it worked like one. I nodded, and the gesture felt like a small, accurate thing. Behind us, the hallway stayed empty. Ahead, the heavy door settled in its hinges and broadcast nothing at all. The vault room breathed its own weather. Metal faces watched from stacked walls, each square with a lock like a shut eye. The attendant chose a key with a triangular head and turned it in companion with mine. Box 147 came forward on its rails as neatly as a tray. She placed it on the table that had learned patience from 1,000 hesitations and stepped back without a sound. I signed again where the ledger asked to be sure, then slid the long, shallow drawer toward me. Inside were the things that had learned to be quiet. Manila folders with their corners softened, a narrow envelope that still remembered a stamp, a small black-field notebook with a rubber band around its middle, and a penciled date on the cover. Numbers and names pressed their calm into the air. I opened the first folder. Raven Oak Holdings, LLC articles clipped clean state seal like a dry coin at the bottom. The registered agent's address, a place where no one would think to knock. A second tab carried a certificate with my initials arranged into a shape no one outside my house would read as me. Beneath that, a deed on heavy paper with a watermark that caught any stray light and made it its own. Riverbend Manor, Beaufort County, meets and bounds, spelled out like a ballad. Tabby Foundation Live Oaks, cataloged by the surveyor as mature creekline edged in reed and reflection. My name where it needed to be, where it had been for long enough to count as fact. Tucked in the back was a photograph the seller had given me the day we signed Riverbend before I touched it. The roof sulked under a rash of missing shingles, windows blank where panes had walked off porch boards, showing daylight between themselves and the earth that had promised to hold them. In the shot, someone's thumb intruded a crescent of pink on the left edge, like a silent witness. I laid the old Riverbend beside the deed and opened the notebook. The pages held a ledger of repairs that read like a diary. If you knew the language, August cut back the laurel, free the sill. October, tabby patch on east wall held. January, chimney, tuck-pointed phrase masonry, good people paid in 2 checks. April, flooring stripped, keep the creak by the library door on purpose. Thomas liked that kind of sound. There were names of craftsmen I'd learned to call before sunrise, men and women who carried their trades in the groove of their shoulders. Liza, who made a dress out of a length of drop cloth and wore it on the hottest day without once complaining. Theo, who could find straight in a wall that had gone old boat crooked and persuade it toward true without making it feel ashamed. I put the notebook back where it belonged, stacked the papers again as if order were another kind of breath, and closed the box. Metal slid home with the hush that only metal knows. The attendant took the tray back and checked the lock with a soft click. All set, she asked. I nodded and signed the ledger one last time. We traded a small nod, sisterhood of people who respect doors, and I stepped out into the corridor where the building remembered the day. The street threw heat onto me like a blanket that had forgotten it was supposed to comfort. Across the square, a boy vaulted the steps 2 at a time with a skateboard in his grip and the kind of grin that cleans a whole block. I checked my phone. A rectangle of missed calls blinked up at me, numbers I recognized, names I would not take just yet. I put the phone face down on my palm and felt the hum of the old city in my bones, trolley wheels whining somewhere 2 streets over, palm fronds trading gossip like old women on a porch. The car's interior held the same warmth it had when I left it, a loyalty I could count. I set my bag on the passenger seat, the folder under it, and drove east where the town thins until the marsh reclaims its say. Highway, then county road, then the 2-lane where fences lean into their own shadows. The sky pulled itself wider, that flat Carolina blue that can make an argument seem small. A white heron lifted out of the ditch legs, trailing like threads it hadn't had time to cut. The Riverbend gate still wore its old paint job, a green so hopeful it had broken your heart, before now sanded and gone to honest gray. I swung it open, and the hinge betraying itself with one indelicate squeal, the only complaint in 50 yards. The drive curved between pecans and wild cane, then tilted enough that you could see the roof beyond the live oaks. The first time I came down this drive, the house had looked like a woman trying not to ask for help. It did not look that way now. The tabby piers lifted the porches clean of the damp. The roofline ran true. The paint on the columns held its breath just enough to shimmer where light gathered. Someone, Theo, had suggested replacing the handrail with something modern. I had kept the old one and sanded the palm-worn places until they showed the grain like a confession. The key still fit like a good thought. Inside cool shaded my skin until my scalp forgot the bank's hard lights. The foyer kept a smell of pine and old books, the kind you only notice when you've been away. The long oak table in the front room sat under the north windows where heat is patient. I laid papers in a row without fanfare, set the notebook near the art books I meant to give back to the library and never did. The chair nearest the window sighed when I sat wood talking about weight like it always does. I took out my phone and turned it face up. Work makes its own quiet when you let it. The credit card company played the same doilied music it always plays while it decides whether you're worth a human voice. When the voice arrived, it called me Ms. Whitfield and asked for 3 pieces of myself to prove I was me. I gave them and said remove the authorized users on account ending in 32. I read names with no tremor in the syllables. The voice asked me to confirm once more, then thanked me for my loyalty and sent a confirmation that pretended to be cheerful. When we said goodbye, the room had that brief post-sound hush like a church after a hymn. Next, the bank where we kept the shared household account. The woman there had a voice with gravel in it and the compassion you only hear from people who have swept a closed shop at midnight. She asked what I needed. I told her. She moved me to the department that moves levers, then came back on the line to say she wanted to make sure it went right. Freeze is active, she said finally, her breath doing the math. No outgoing until you say it again. I thanked her and she said, like we had agreed not to put sparkles on the thing. The mortgage company's hold music smelled like coffee you forgot to drink. A man named Darren explained dates and delinquency and what letters a person gets when a house stops being paid for. He did it like a weather report, this much rain, this much wind, do not stand under trees. I listened and wrote exactly what he said in the notebook with a pencil that fit my fingers. When he asked if I wanted him to repeat, I said I'd heard him just fine. The afternoon gave its light a different color. You could see the creek beyond the reeds catch the sky in its shoulders. A dragonfly sat on the sill and made a sound like a zipper thinking it over. I made tea and burned my tongue a little because I didn't wait. The burn pinned me to the moment, and that was good. A car slowed at the gate. The sound of tires making up their mind on gravel is its own language. I stood where the hallway opens on the front room and watched the line of sunlight on the floor reach toward my toes. The knock when it came was not a demand. I opened the door, and there stood Ava, hair rough from a hand that had pulled too hard. The skin under her eyes thin as paper you can almost see through. She held her bag with both hands like she'd borrowed it. "I didn't call," she said in the voice she uses when she wants to tell the truth and hide it at once. "No," I said. She looked past me into the cool. The way she looked at space has not changed since she was 8 and figured out you can make a fort under a table by hanging a sheet and calling the dog inside to make it feel official. She stepped in small, her shoes squeaked. "This is," she began and stopped. I could have given her a word. I did not. In the front room, she paused at the table and read the top line of the deed out loud, without meaning to. "Riverbend," she said to herself, the name tasting new. She sat on the edge of the chair like she had been told she might have to give it back. "Sloan says I should make you see reason," she said. "That there's a way to," and she lifted her hands in a shape that tried to be a bridge. "She says you're angry and you'll burn the house down to stay warm." I set the mug near the corner of the table and watched the steam work itself thinner. "You hungry?" I asked. She shook her head and then looked like she didn't trust that answer. "No," she said again. I ate. Her wrist found the opposite palm old habit thumb, rubbing the soft place where the skin thins. She looked at the deed again like it might give her a script. "I don't want to lose everything." I sat. Wood spoke. "I treated the room like a room and not a stage because rooms remember what you do with them." "I'm not burning anything," I said. "I'm turning off fires that weren't mine." Her face tipped toward the table as if the gravity there had increased. "Can't you stop the—" She searched for the noun, and the nouns all ran from her. The cards, the account, just for now. "For now has been for years," I said, not unkind. She swallowed like her throat had remembered salt. A breeze pushed at the screen and then gave up. The dragonfly left. Ava put her hands flat and looked at them. Her thumbnails had the same pale half-moons I do. "Sloan says you're making me choose," she said quietly, "between you and a life I was building." I waited until the clock gave a small wooden sound it gives at the half hour. "You're choosing either way," I said. "This line or that one, the choosing's not new." She breathed out hard enough to move a paper curl I hadn't noticed near the ledger. "You think I don't see what she does," she said, and the sentence cracked but didn't fall. "I see parts. I don't always know which ones to believe." "Believe what costs you and what keeps you," I said. It was the nearest sentence to a map I had. Her mouth made a thin shape that used to mean she was thinking about a math test, and now meant she was thinking about a person. "I don't want you to hate me," she said. "I don't," I said. The word sat where it landed and didn't get up to perform. She looked around the room and found the north window, the best light the one architect's court, without saying so. She stood and put her hand on the sill as if she needed to feel the measure of something that would not step back. "This place," she said, almost to the wall. "You did this." "I did," I said. She nodded once, twice, and I saw the count she made as a child, when she needed courage to jump from the pier, 1 for the wind, 2 for the water. "I have to go," she said, which meant she could not stand inside 2 ideas at the same time and breathe right. She walked to the door with her bag held on the wrong shoulder and paused on the threshold where the floorboard on purpose gives its one good creak. She listened. "Survival," she said, and the word didn't ask a question. "Survival," I said back. At the gate, the car idled while she looked at the live oaks like they could tell her where the shade ends and the light begins. Gravel settled after she left, each stone finding its place again. The house made a tiny adjustment as the day turned its face, a timber noise, so small you could miss it if you were not the kind of person who keeps the old handrail because hands have learned it. I washed the mug, dried it, put it back where it lives. On the table, the paper sat very still. The notebook lay open to the page where I had written Darren's numbers. I sharpened the pencil with the knife I keep in the drawer by the range, a knife Thomas honed until it learned to be modest. Shavings curled like pale worms, and I brushed them into my palm and carried them to the bin. The tea had cooled. I drank it anyway. The light in the front room adjusted itself from yellow to something less named. In the yard, a wren told the same story 3 times and then forgot it had. The river behind the reeds brought the tide in on its schedule. I stood and let the quiet do the arithmetic. By late day, the light had turned the porches gold and the asphalt thin with heat. I took the long way back to Willow Lane so my hands could forget the bank's chill before they remembered the door. Behind me, the process server's sedan kept an ordinary distance, the kind that looks like coincidence to everyone who needs it to. A locksmith named Elias met us at the corner with a canvas roll of picks and cylinders tied neat as a picnic. He set the roll in the shade near the hibiscus and leaned his shoulder against the railing like a man willing to wait his turn. The block had already gathered itself into curiosity. Mr. Calhoun put down his hose and traded it for a broom he didn't use. Miss Hattie's screen door whispered open. A boy in a Braves cap sat on his handlebars and let the front tire tick against the curb until the bike inched forward and then back again. The ceiling fan on my porch turned slowly enough to be decorative, the chain bending toward the floor like it was tired of being a tail. Sloane was in the doorway before my foot hit the first step. The linen robe had been traded for a silk blouse the color of champagne that wanted to look like virtue. She held the jam with 3 fingers, the rest of her hand on display. "You picked quite a time," she said, smile bright enough to register across the street. "Afternoon," I said to the threshold. Ava stood 2 paces back, arms folded high, the way a person tries to keep warmth in. She had changed nothing about herself but the set of her mouth. Her eyes came to me and then moved off as if they were protecting something behind them. I put the folder under my arm and gave a small nod to the process server. He was a thin man named Benton with a tie that pretended not to be old. His shoes were kind to the wood. "Ms. Whitfield," he said for the porch to hear. "That's right." He handed me 2 sealed envelopes and kept one. "Notice to quit with date and time," stamped, he said in a tone used by men who deliver weather reports in anesthesia. He turned to the door and addressed the air in general. "Ms. Harrell, Ms. Whitfield." He read names, confirmed the address, set the papers where they could be taken without anyone having to admit they were taken, then stepped back the way a tide does. Sloane laughed sharp as a struck glass. "You cannot be serious," she said. "You're serving me in front of my neighbors." "It's a public street," Benton said, which was not comfort and not unkindness. He tipped his head and drifted down the steps to where his sedan waited, like a person who had seen this kind of afternoon before. Sloane looked past me to Elias. "And who is that?" "Locksmith," I said. "He's here to rekey after you've vacated or to schedule it if you'd like a time on the calendar." Elias lifted his hand once in a lazy hello and then let it fall. He did not take his foot off the bottom rail. "You can't change the locks," Sloane said. "We live here. The owner of record can rekey when occupancy changes," I said. "You've been served notice. There's a schedule. No one's sleeping on the porch." I slid the top sheet from the folder so it could see the light and be less of a threat. The deed carried my name where a person in this town expects to find one. "Title's clear," I said for the boards to hear it too. Ava's breath caught just enough to make the silk at Sloane's shoulder tremble. She stepped forward and then back like a swimmer walking the line where the shallows give up, being sure. "Mom," she said, and flattened her voice so it wouldn't betray its own quiver. "We're fine," Sloane cut in. "We're more than fine." She pivoted to the steps and arranged a smile bright enough for the square. "This is a misunderstanding," she told the afternoon, and the afternoon offered no opinion. I reached into the folder again. "This is separate," I said, and held a single-page operating agreement with a stapled cover letter from a property manager out on Marsh Walk. "The duplex by the marsh you've been speaking about," I said to Sloane without turning it into a weapon. "Palmetto Property sent this over." They wanted to verify the second member's information before they updated the draw schedule. Color moved out of Sloane's face and then decided to stand at the very edges. "What second member?" "Raven Oak holds 50%, I said. "Your buy-in was the deposit you put on my card last spring under the category Household Sundries. You can call and dispute the purchase if you'd like. The bank has the receipt. The processor described the charge as earnest money. The memo line has your initials." Miss Hattie stopped pretending to read her mail. The boy on the bike put his feet down. Mr. Calhoun discovered his broom had remembered how to sweep and set it moving in patient arcs over a clean square of concrete. Sloane's mouth collected itself into something careful. "You're saying you own my family's investment," she said, tasting each word before she risked it in public. "I'm saying what the paper says," I answered. "If Palmetto has questions, they can call me." I did not add that they had already called or that numbers rearranged themselves under attention, the way people do. Ava's hands slipped to her sides and then found each other again. The narrow bones at her wrist lifted like a small prayer. "Sloane," she said, quiet as a back row. It wasn't a warning and it wasn't an apology. It was a name pronounced by someone remembering how to hear sounds without being told what they mean. Sloane's eyes went glassy and then hard from the inside out. "You're cruel," she said, and for the first time the word didn't know where to put itself. She looked from me to the neighbors and back, as if to collect a jury, as if to choose her best angle, but finding every angle already taken. "You're humiliating your daughter." "My daughter is standing on a porch." "She doesn't have to defend," I said. "She can come with me. She can stay. She can go where she needs to in order to breathe. The papers don't change that." The front door screen tapped once against its frame and then learned to be still. A midge danced in a sleeve of sunlight between us and then disappeared, bored of being an ornament. Somewhere a truck found second gear and shouted about it. Benton returned from his sedan with a second set of copies because the first set looked lonely. He handed them to Sloane and she took them like a person picking up a hot pan by instinct and regretting it in the same motion. 48 hours, he said. There's contact information at the bottom. He looked at Ava as if to remind the world that the world is full of people who still look other people in the eye. "Ma'am," he said, and went back into his afternoon. Elias cleared his throat once and the small sound put the porch back in its own body. If y'all want to choose a time, he said, I can come back at whatever o'clock keeps the peace. Tomorrow, I said. We'll set it at 10. Sloane's laugh snapped itself into 2 pieces. You're not changing locks on me, she said, drawing herself up until the silk learned to stretch. Ava and I are staying. We have rights. You think a piece of paper makes you queen? Pieces of paper make houses and cars and boats and marriages, I said. They make bank accounts. They make the difference between being asked and being told. Paper's the part where people keep their promises when they've run out of charm. Ava blinked and didn't hide it. She took 1 step toward me and then stopped at the board that gives its creak, the one that tells the true story of weight. The sound ran under all our shoes and into the posts, and then into the ground that had agreed to hold this house up a little longer. Mom, she said again, and this time the word was not a test. It was a fact. I put the folder back under my arm. I'll be by in the morning, I said to the room of it, not to either of them. If you need boxes, there are some in the shed. The sentence was a small mercy. I let it be only that. No one moved. Movement would have admitted a kind of agreement that hadn't been signed yet. I stepped down, careful not to scuff the paint I had paid for twice. At the bottom, Elias lifted his canvas roll like a flag and followed not close. Miss Hattie's dog decided to bark twice officially so the street could mark the moment. On the sidewalk, Mr. Calhoun swept a stripe away from my toes and nodded with the solemnity of someone who has seen many versions of the same play. The boy in the Braves cap said ma'am and then looked down as if the word were an animal that might bolt. The heat laid its hand on the back of my neck and didn't let go. At the foot of the steps, I felt Ava's gaze find the center of my shoulders, the way a person looks for the north point on a compass face. I did not turn around. I did not ask the porch to keep my secrets. I crossed the small square of grass that has never allowed itself to die under a coastal summer and reached the car that knew my hands. The envelopes rested against the wood behind me, breathing their own thin breath. The fan chain nudged the air. The square settled into its ordinary noises like a room after a prayer. Dusk laid a lavender band across the marsh, and the road back to Riverbend felt like a sentence that knew where to stop. The fan in the car clicked once in its housing and fell obedient again. The paper envelopes on the passenger seat breathed a dry official breath and then forgot me. At the bend where the pecans begin, 2 deer lifted their heads together and then set them down as if agreement were simple. The hinge at the gate tried one small complaint before remembering itself. In the yard, the cane made its thin applause, and the porch kept the heat it had borrowed all day and was not ready to return. Inside, the foyer's cool met the salt on my skin and turned it honest. I set my bag on the oak table, and the room recognized the sound. A fly traced the rim of the lampshade like a man thinking about leaving town. There was 1 box left in the trunk from the morning picture wire, a packet of brass nails, a small shadow frame wrapped in brown paper with the corner dented where it had leaned all afternoon against the carpet. I carried it in unwrapped, the paper let it fall in a neat square on the table, so the crease would be kinder when I folded it. The frame's glass held a stubborn thumbprint, mine probably, and under the glass on a velvet, dark as a dock, at night, a brass compass rested with its needle still and faithful. I had found the compass years ago in a tray of tarnished clocks at a church sale, its back engraved long ago with 2 initials that had no business with me. Tonight, I added a tag I'd cut from thick card and tied with kitchen twine. I wrote 2 words in my hand that knows a ledger from a love note, true north. The hammer I chose is one that barely deserves the name light and domestic, the color of a pie tin. I held the nail in place with 2 fingers and tapped it in above the north-facing window where the wall understands restraint. The first tap woke a tiny echo, the second made it sure. I hung the frame so the compass sat at eye level and stepped back until the room chose its proportions. When the last light found the glass, the brass lifted a small sun of its own and sent it into the air without bragging. In the kitchen, the kettle worked itself up without hurry. I set a lemon on the board, cut it clean, and touched the blade with my thumb the way a person checks a friend's temperature. The cup steamed like a little train. I took it to the front room and sat where the floorboards keep their one deliberate creak for company. The house adjusted around me in the slow language of wood. The tide below the reeds put its shoulder to the creek's curve and did the work water is born for. The knock came as if the knuckles had rehearsed kindness. I opened the door before the second tap. Ava stood on the step in a shirt she had owned before Sloane, collar wrinkled from being honest with the day. She had driven without drying her hair, and the sea air had stroked it into salt. A single paint fleck rode her forearm white on a brown, a memory from a Saturday we had made a rail look new. "May I come in?" she asked. "You may," I said, and moved so the screen could open without making either of us step aside. She walked into the foyer like a person readjusting to gravity after a long bridge. Her eyes learned the cool, then the light, then the scent that lives where pine and paper keep one another company. The compass found her, and she found it back. "You hung it," she said, as if she had been expected to know what it was. I did. She stood under it. The needle minded its own north without argument. She reached as if to touch the glass and then thought better. "It's pretty," she said, then shook her head once like the word had dressed itself wrong. "No, it's right." We went to the front room. She chose the chair by the north window because she has always known where the good light is. I set another cup for her and watched her fingers worry at the handle until the china made that polite, dry note a cup makes when it forgives you. "I was wrong to be quiet," she said, not yet lifting her eyes. "Not only today, for a long time." I let the sentence arrive and find a seat. Outside, something with wings learned its own shadow against the screen. She looked up. "You gave me a door and I let someone else set a lock in it," she said. "I don't know when I agreed to that." Maybe I didn't agree. Maybe I only didn't disagree loud enough. The kettle in the kitchen ticked as it cooled. I could hear the tiny click of metal shrinking back to its size. "You don't owe me an alibi," I said. "I owe you the truth," she answered. "And something else." She reached into her bag and brought out a card, mine cut in half through the numbers, the two pieces nested like fish. She laid them on the table carefully, as if even broken a thing deserves steadiness. "This is yours," she said. "I won't use it. I won't ask you to hold me up by pretending not to notice." The edges showed where the scissors had argued and lost. The halves lay there like a choice already made. I did not reach for them. The gesture had to be allowed to be what it was without applause. Ava's mouth tried on a smile and set it aside. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," she said. "I'm asking if I can come to you clean." "You can," I said. The words took their places like old chairs back under a table. She looked at the compass again. "What does it say for you?" she asked. "That I know where I stand," I said. "And that if a door opens, we both see it open." She nodded, and I watched the count she does, 1, 2, and this time there was no water to jump into, only a room with a table and a mother who had learned to sit still. "I'm sorry," she said, and the apology arrived bare without satin on it. "I hear you," I said, "and you're hungry." She blinked like hunger had just been introduced to her by its first name. "A little," she admitted. I cut bread and set out the last of the summer peaches from the bowl that lives by the sink. We ate like people who have been busy not eating, slow grateful to our mouths for remembering what to do. Her shoulders let go of a measure I could not calculate. In the quiet, the compass gave one nerve-tiny twitch and held steady again. When the plates were empty, Ava stood and carried them to the sink, without needing to ask where the dish soap lives. At the window, she paused, hands in the water, and watched the last of the sky lean toward the creek. "This house," she said. "You brought it back." "It brought me back," I said, and the sentence didn't need fixing. She dried her hands and came to the doorway, fingers resting on the wood that has learned every weight it's been asked to hold. "I'm going to sleep at Hannah's tonight," she said. "The name honest, the plan small enough to live. Tomorrow I'll pack my things." She didn't ask permission. She didn't offer repentance as currency. She told me where she would be the way a person tells a person who has the right to know. "All right," I said. At the threshold she hesitated, then stepped to the compass and looked into the glass until her own face let her see it. She lifted a finger and tapped the frame lightly. Once, not superstitious, not a bargain, just contact. "Good night, Mom," she said. "Good night," I said, and the word carried its own light as it crossed the room. When the door closed, the floor answered with its one honest creak and then set itself still. I washed the knife Thomas had kept sharp and dried it with the cloth that knows how to leave no lint. I folded the brown wrapping paper to fit the drawer where string and tape make modest plans with one another. In the front room, the compass hung in its quiet. The needle did not waver. The house exhaled. Outside, the marsh lifted a dark shoulder under the moon, and the live oaks kept their counsel. A wren settled down to the small responsibility of its own heart. I turned off the lamp. The glass caught the last of the light and let it go without argument. The night held, the room held, the north held. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.